What if the home you spent your entire life working toward became mathematically impossible to keep? Not because of anything you did wrong, but simply because of where it sits on a map. Something is happening to Florida that nobody in the tourism brochures will tell you about. Quietly, with a slow-motion brutality that doesn't make headlines until it's too late, people are being priced out of their own homes. Not because they made bad decisions or borrowed too much, but because the cost of simply existing in certain Florida towns has become mathematically impossible for ordinary people to sustain. This isn't a story about luxury condos or billionaire beach houses. It's about the retired teacher in Punta Gorda who opened an insurance renewal letter in January 2024 and sat down on her kitchen floor because her legs gave out. It's about the young family in Kissimmee who did everything right, saved for years, bought modest, stayed employed, and still had to leave. And it's about 10 specific towns where the numbers have crossed a line most people don't even realize has been crossed. By the end of this, you'll understand not just where the crisis is worst, but why it happened, and why the conventional explanations are only half the story. There's a deeper mechanism here, connecting insurance markets, climate science, Wall Street, and 15 years of decisions in Tallahassee. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Let's start where the pain is most visible. Punta Gorda sits on Charlotte Harbor, about halfway down Florida's Gulf Coast. It's the kind of place that looks like a retirement dream: waterfront restaurants, sailboats, royal palms. In 2019, the median home price here was $289,000. By early 2024, it had climbed to $412,000, a 42% jump in 5 years. Painful, but survivable, if that were the only problem. It isn't. The real crisis in Punta Gorda isn't the purchase price. It's what happens after you buy. Homeowners here are now routinely paying $8,000 to $14,000 per year in property insurance. Not for mansions, but for modest, single-family homes in flood zones. That's $700 to $1,200 a month, before your mortgage, before your taxes, before a single utility bill. Charlotte County's property tax rate of roughly 1.1% adds another $375 a month on a $412,000 home. Add a 30-year mortgage at current rates, and the total monthly housing cost exceeds $3,500 for a home that cost under $300,000 5 years ago. The retired teacher's name is Carol Metzger. She moved to Punta Gorda in 2017. After 31 years in the Pinellas County school system, she bought her house for $267,000, put 20% down, and figured she'd spend her retirement on the water. When her insurance renewal arrived in January 2024, her annual premium had jumped from $3,800 to $11,200. In 1 year, her pension is $2,100 a month. Do the math yourself, because Carol did, on that kitchen floor, calculator in hand, at 9 in the morning. She listed the house in March. It sold in 47 days. She moved to Immokalee, inland, away from the water she had retired to be near. Punta Gorda is not alone, and the next town shows just how quickly a place can go from cautionary tale to catastrophe. FloridaExodus, or what's left of it. Hurricane Ian made landfall here in September 2022 as a Category 4 storm, with winds reaching 150 miles per hour. The storm surge in some areas exceeded 18 feet. Entire neighborhoods were scraped clean. As of late 2024, roughly 40% of the pre-Ian housing stock on FloridaExodus had either not been rebuilt or been sold to developers and investment groups. The families who lived there, many of them for decades, are gone, and most of them are not coming back. For those who stayed and rebuilt, the financial calculus is almost surreal. A home that cost $350,000 before Ian now carries an insurance premium that can exceed $20,000 a year, if you can get coverage at all. Citizens Property Insurance, Florida's insurer of last resort, has been shedding policies in high-risk coastal areas, pushing some FloridaExodus homeowners onto the surplus lines market, policies from carriers not regulated by the state, with premiums that swing dramatically year to year. One homeowner, a contractor named Dennis Howell, who rebuilt his home after Ian at a cost of $280,000, received a surplus lines quote for $24,500 annually. His response, quoted in a Charlotte Sun article from August 2023, was that he rebuilt it just so he could sell it. Now here's where it gets complicated in a way that most coverage of this crisis misses entirely. When major insurance carriers, Bankers Insurance, Lighthouse Property Insurance, Weston Property and Casualty began collapsing or withdrawing from Florida between 2020 and 2023, the assumption was that this was purely a hurricane problem. Too many storms, too many claims, unsustainable payouts. That's true, but incomplete. The deeper issue is something called reinsurance, the insurance that insurance companies buy to protect themselves. Florida carriers rely heavily on the global reinsurance market, dominated by firms in Bermuda, London, and Munich. When those global reinsurers decided that Florida's climate risk had been systematically underpriced for decades, they raised their rates dramatically. That cost got passed directly to Florida homeowners. The storms were the trigger. The reinsurance repricing was the gun. And that gun is still pointed at every coastal town in the state. Keep that in mind as we move north. Crystal River on Florida's Nature Coast was supposed to be different. Inland enough to feel protected, affordable enough to attract working families and budget-conscious retirees, small enough to stay under the radar of the frenzy that consumed Miami and Tampa. In 2020, you could buy a decent 3-bedroom home in Crystal River for $175,000. By mid-2024, that same home was listing at $295,000, a 69% increase in 4 years in a town of fewer than 4,000 people. But the story in Crystal River isn't just price appreciation, it's the rental market underneath it. As ownership becomes unaffordable, demand for rentals spikes and landlords raise rents. The average 2-bedroom apartment in Citrus County, which surrounds Crystal River, went from $950 per month in 2020 to $1,450 per month in 2024. For someone earning the Citrus County median household income of approximately $52,000 per year, that rental now consumes 33% of gross income. Financial advisors traditionally recommend keeping housing costs below 30% of gross income. Crystal River has crossed that line quietly without anyone declaring a crisis. The people displaced here aren't wealthy retirees who can absorb the hit. They work at the Winn-Dixie, staff the local hospital, drive the school buses. When they can't afford the county where they work, they drive from farther away or leave the workforce. Citrus County's largest employer, the Citrus Memorial Health System, reported in 2023 that workforce housing had become a top recruitment challenge, a hospital, struggling to house its own nurses. When the people who staff a community can no longer afford to live in it, the community itself starts to come apart. Homestead in Miami-Dade County's southernmost reach is a different flavor of the same problem. For years, Homestead was where people went when they couldn't afford anywhere else in South Florida. Agricultural roots, working-class character, a community built by people who drove an hour to Miami so they could own something instead of rent. The median home price in Homestead in 2019 was $271,000. By 2024, it had reached $445,000, a 64% increase and the complete collapse of South Florida's last affordable refuge. The mechanism here is different from the Gulf Coast towns. Homestead wasn't driven by insurance crisis or storm damage, it was driven by displacement. As Miami, Coral Gables, and Doral became unaffordable even for upper-middle-class buyers, demand pushed south. Each displaced buyer pushed out someone from the next tier down. The family that could no longer afford Doral moved to Homestead. The family that could no longer afford Homestead moved to where exactly? Homestead was the end of the road. Beyond it is Everglades National Park. Immokalee, 40 miles inland from Naples, is a town most Florida real estate coverage ignores entirely because it doesn't fit the coastal luxury narrative. It shouldn't be ignored. Immokalee is one of the most economically distressed communities in the state. A farm worker town where the median household income hovers around $31,000 a year, and where overcrowding in rental housing has reached levels housing advocates call a public health emergency. Single-family homes here are rented to multiple families at once. A 3-bedroom house renting for $1,800 a month might house 2 or 3 families sharing costs, because no single household can afford it alone on agricultural wages. The Collier County Housing Authority has an affordable housing waiting list that, as of 2024, exceeds 3,000 households. In a county of roughly 390,000 people, that is a quiet catastrophe. The farm workers picking tomatoes for national grocery chains earning $12 to $15 an hour in the fields are living in conditions that would shock most of the people buying those tomatoes in an Orlando Publix. This is the part of the crisis that doesn't get photographed. It's not the retired couple worried about a premium. It's the family of 5 in a 2-bedroom unit with a broken air conditioner in July in Immokalee, with no waiting list movement and nowhere else to go. If you've made it this far, you're already paying closer attention to Florida than most people who skim the headlines. Whether you already own a home here or you're planning the move, the next several towns are the part you need to hear, because this is where the pattern stops being 10 separate places and becomes one single machine. Stay with me. Kissimmee occupies a strange middle ground. It's close enough to Orlando's tourism economy to be economically active, but far enough from the beach to have historically been affordable. The young family mentioned at the start of this story, Marcus and Janelle Ortega, bought a 3-bedroom home in Kissimmee in 2021 for $298,000. They were proud of it. First-generation homeowners, both working in the hospitality sector, one at a hotel near Disney, one in catering. Their mortgage payment was $1,640 per month. Manageable. Then their insurance renewal arrived in 2023. Their premium went from $2,200 to $6,800 a year. Their property taxes were reassessed upward as values rose. Their total monthly housing cost went from $1,640 to $2,480. Their combined take-home pay is about $5,200 a month. They were now spending 47% of their income on housing alone. They held on 8 months, then listed the house, sold it for $361,000, paid off the mortgage, and moved to Polk County, which is itself starting to show the same patterns. Kissimmee's Osceola County has seen its median home price rise from $255,000 in 2020 to $380,000 in 2024. The county's population is heavily Latino, working class, and employed in tourism, an industry that pays well enough to live in Kissimmee when housing costs are moderate and catastrophically insufficient when they're not. Daytona Beach, the name conjures spring break and NASCAR. What's happening there now is neither. Volusia County's housing market has been transformed by a surge of remote workers and retirees from the Northeast who discovered Daytona Beach offered beach access at a fraction of Miami or Tampa prices. That discovery priced out the people who were already there. The median home price in Daytona Beach proper rose from $168,000 in 2020 to $289,000 in 2024. For a city where 23% of residents live below the federal poverty line, that trajectory is not an inconvenience. It's a displacement event. The city's beachside neighborhoods, once home to working-class families and retirees on fixed incomes, are now dotted with short-term rentals and investor-owned units sitting empty between bookings. Volusia County had roughly 4,200 active short-term rental listings as of mid-2024. Each one is a unit not available to a local renter. The economics are straightforward. A property that earns $2,800 per month on Airbnb will not be rented to a local family for $1,200. The market has spoken. The local family has to listen, and then the local family has to leave. Before the final 3 towns, here's something worth having if you own property in Florida or you're weighing a move here. Every town worth buying into and every town worth avoiding in this state is now in one place. It's a complete breakdown of 40 Florida towns, 20 rated to buy and 20 rated to avoid, in a single guide called the Florida Buy and Avoid List for 2026. You can get it through the link in the description below. But stay right here, because the deeper reason connecting all 10 of these towns is the part almost nobody is talking about, and it's coming up next. Pensacola in Florida's western panhandle was the last major Florida metro to feel the full weight of this crisis. Its isolation closer to New Orleans than to Miami kept it insulated from South Florida's price pressures for years. That insulation is gone. Escambia County median home prices rose 58% between 2020 and 2024, from $219,000 to $346,000. Insurance costs along the Gulf Coast have made Pensacola particularly vulnerable, given its direct exposure to Gulf hurricane tracks. After Hurricane Sally in 2020 and several near misses since, carriers began treating Pensacola with the same risk pricing long applied to the Tampa Bay corridor. Military families stationed at Naval Air Station Pensacola, a significant portion of the local population, receive a basic allowance for housing that the Department of Defense calculates from local rental rates. As of 2024, that allowance for an enlisted service member with dependents in the Pensacola area is $1,980 per month. The average two-bedroom rental in Escambia County is $1,650, technically affordable, except that insurance requirements for landlords have driven many rental property owners to raise rents further or sell entirely, shrinking the available inventory. Commuting families in Pensacola are now routinely commuting from Alabama, a state away, because the Florida side of the border has become unworkable. Palmbay in Brevard County on the Space Coast rounds out the picture in a way that feels almost ironic. This is the county that hosts Kennedy Space Center, employing aerospace engineers, defense contractors, and NASA personnel. The median household income in Brevard County is $62,000, above the state average, and yet Palmbay, the county's largest city, has seen such rapid price appreciation that even its well-compensated workforce is feeling the squeeze. Median home prices in Palmbay went from $220,000 in 2020 to $355,000 in 2024. Combined with insurance costs that have risen sharply due to Brevard's coastal exposure, the effective affordability has collapsed for anyone earning below $75,000 per year. That's not a fringe population. That's the majority of the city. And finally, Naples. This one might surprise you because Naples is already known as expensive. But the story here isn't the wealthy buyers who've always been there. It's the condo market, specifically the post-Ian, post-Surfside building safety legislation that triggered mandatory structural inspections and reserve funding for buildings over 3 stories. Condo owners in Naples are receiving special assessment notices, one-time charges for building repairs and reserve replenishment that range from $15,000 to $85,000 per unit. These aren't optional. Refuse to pay and the association can lien your property. For retirees on fixed incomes who bought their Naples condo a decade ago as a retirement asset, these assessments arrive like a financial ambush. Many are selling. The buyers are, increasingly, institutional investors and cash flush out-of-state purchasers who see distressed sellers as opportunity. So here is the real reason. Not one reason, but a system of reasons that interlock like gears. Climate risk, finally and brutally priced into the insurance market after decades of being subsidized and ignored. Reinsurance repricing, driven by global capital markets that have accepted what Florida's leadership has not, that the state's coastal exposure is a compounding liability, not a stable asset. Speculative investment converting homes from places people live into financial instruments that generate returns. A state legislature that until recently prioritized deregulation and carrier flexibility over policyholder protection, leaving ordinary homeowners exposed when the market turned. And a migration wave, millions moving to Florida for exactly the reasons it's now becoming unlivable, that overwhelmed infrastructure, drove up prices, and accelerated every other pressure at once. Carol Metzger is in Ocala now. She says it's fine, the house is smaller, the street quieter, and she misses the harbor. She says she made the right decision, and she says it quickly, the way people do when they're trying to convince themselves of something. Marcus and Janelle Ortega are in Polk County. Their new mortgage payment is $1,890 per month. Their insurance premium is $4,200 per year. For now, it works. They check the renewal date every year with the specific dread of people who've learned that stability is not a condition, it's a countdown. The towns on this list are not anomalies, they are previews. The pressures shaping Punta Gorda, FloridaPulse, and Kissimmee today are moving inland and north into counties that still feel protected by distance from the coast or the money. They're not protected, they're just next in line, and the line is moving faster than anyone expected. What's happening in Florida right now is a controlled experiment, except nothing about it is controlled and nobody consented to it, in what happens when climate risk, financialization, and policy failure converge on a housing market at once. The results are in, and the people paying the price aren't the ones who designed the experiment. So here's what I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments which Florida town you live in or which one you're planning to move to, and what your insurance renewal did to you this year, because the numbers you share shape the next video. And tell me what you want covered next. If you believe the real story of this market is the one the national headlines keep skipping, hit the subscribe button right now, because next we're tracing which Florida towns are about to follow the 10 on this list, the inland counties that still feel safe and have no idea what's heading toward them. Carol and the Ortegas didn't see it coming. The rest of us still have time. We'll see you in the next one.